everybody! Today we're going to be learning about section 8.14, which is on pollution and human health. Learning objective for today is that you can identify sources of human health issues that are linked to pollution. Some of the essential knowledge that you're going to gain is kind of why it's difficult for scientists to sometimes make connections between human health and pollution. And we're also going to learn about some specific important human health issues that College Boards feels you need to know about. Now, before we start this, whoops, my order's messed up a little bit. We are going to cover two important USA laws that you need to know about, kind of generally related to like human health and proper disposal of waste and stuff like that. And these are laws that you are expected to know for the AP Environmental Science test. So you want to know these ones. The first one is called the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, which is commonly called Circla. It is also called the Superfund Law. So if you hear of like Superfunds, it's because of Circla. Now this was passed in 1980, so it's not that old. Kind of old, but 1980 in response to harmful hazardous waste practices. And what this does is it establishes a federal superfund, so like a large portion of money that is set aside to clean up uncontrolled or abandoned hazardous waste sites, accidents, spills, and then other emergency releases of pollutants and contaminants into the environment. Now, places that are receiving funds for these cleanup efforts are known as Superfund sites. They are receiving some of those Superfunds. And right now, there's currently about 1,400 of these Superfund sites in the United States. Fun fact, the bay that the Port of Tacoma is located on, that is a Superfund site. And we've actually got a decent amount of them around us, and most states and most areas have Superfund sites near them. So this was clearly like a serious issue, which is part of why Circla was passed. And it takes decades to get these things cleaned up. So like Port of Tacoma has been a Superfund site since the 80s, and they're still working on it. Either way, it's awesome that we have these, but it's not something where they just like swoop in and clean it up and it's done in a couple years. So Superfunds usually take a decent amount of cleaning and time and money to make that happen. Now, the other law that you need to know about is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, also is sometimes referred to as the Cradle to Grave Law. It has been referred to as both of these things on the AP test, so it's important for you to know both of those terms. Now, this law was enacted in 1976, and what it does is it gives the EPA the power to control hazardous waste from cradle to grave. Basically from beginning to end is what they mean by that. And what this can include is like the generation, the creation of hazardous waste, the transportation, the treatment, the storage, the disposal of all of these hazardous waste. So from beginning to end, from cradle to grave, is what this gives the EPA power to like potentially come in and control how things are being done. It also creates a framework for the proper management of hazardous and non-hazardous solid waste. So again, those are two important laws that you need to know. All right, so we're going to talk a bit about routes of exposure and something called synergism. And one thing that it's really important for you to be aware of is that it can be difficult for scientists to establish exactly how toxic different pollutants are to humans because we have so many routes of exposure to so many different pollutants that studying the effects of just one pollutant can be difficult. So when we're looking at routes of exposure, these are going to be ways that a pollutant enters the human body. And we've learned about some of these. So these are just kind of some recap examples of like how lead we can get from water pipes and paint chips. Mercury can come from seafood, such as like tuna up higher in the food chain. Carbon monoxide we can get from indoor biomass combustion, particulate matter like pollen dust, arsenic. It says from rice, you don't get arsenic from eating all rice, but like if rice is contaminated, then you can get arsenic poisoning from it. And it can also come from groundwater. So these are just kind of some examples here. Now we also have something called synergism. And this is going to be the interaction of two or more substances to cause an effect that is greater than each of them individually. So for example, asthma can be caused by particulate matter from coal power plants. And also COVID-19 can damage lungs. So like if we're looking at the two of those, if somebody comes in with like damaged lungs, all right, is it because they had asthma? Is it because they had COVID? Is it because they were near coal power plants? It's because of particulate matter. You can't always just like narrow it down to one thing because there's like so many things out there that can cause harm to us. Another example would be like the carcinogenic effects of asbestos. But also if that person was a smoker or was around secondhand smoke, you can't always determine like, okay, did this come from the asbestos? Does it come from smoking? Is it probably from both of them? So because of synergism and the fact that we get these interactions of two or more substances, this makes it so that it can be really hard to pinpoint the exact effects of one specific pollutant on humans. This is part of why when COVID-19 was first happening and scientists were like trying to figure out like, okay, what even causes it? And even still, we have a hard time like knowing like, okay, well, what is COVID-19 causing? What are the health implications? Because there's a lot that goes into this and different things interact, and people can have pre-existing conditions that then make COVID like impact them differently. And it's usually not just as simple as like, oh, asbestos, cancer. It's kind of like all these steps of things. So we're going to talk about some specific examples of like exact like types of pollutants that you need to be aware of. And the first is tropospheric ozone. Just ozone, which we talked about when we talked about photochemical smog. So hopefully you're aware of this, but just kind of a recap because it's an important one. What this does is it worsens respiratory conditions like asthma, emphysema, bronchitis, COPD, and just limits overall lung function. It's going to irritate the muscles or the respiratory tract, causing constriction of airways and shortness of breath. And even when it gets like really into your whole like system, it can even be irritating to the eyes as well. And this kind of shows like all the different, it can even cause headaches, cause eye issues, shortness of breath, asthma, heart attack, just kind of the whole respiratory system there. Now, this is going to be kind of reminding you that photochemical smog is going to be what can cause like a source of this ozone, like problems. The ozone comes from the photochemical breakdown of the nitrous dioxide, which comes from car exhaust, coal, and natural gas combustion. Now, this diagram here, a reminder, don't just use words like pollution on the AP test. You got to be specific. Nitrogen dioxide plus like the breakdown from photochemical is going to be causing the creation of this ozone. Now, remember also that ozone exists in the stratosphere naturally, and that's good. Like that helps us with like our UV radiation and all of that. So ozone is only harmful in the troposphere. When it's up, like protecting us, we like that. When it's down here and we're breathing it in, that's when it causes problems for us. Next one is going to be mesothelioma, and this comes from asbestos. And we've previously like learned about asbestos, but we haven't like dove into some of the exact things that can come from it. So mesothelioma is going to be one of them. This is going to be a type of cancerous tumor that is caused by exposure to asbestos, and it primarily is going to affect the lining, the epithelium of the respiratory tract, the heart, or the abdominal cavity. Now, remember that asbestos is going to be coming primarily from like old fireproof materials. It can be in insulation, it can be in tiles, it can be in like things that we sprayed down ducts with. But asbestos particles, when they're released into the air and they're inhaled, that's when asbestos is going to be a problem. And that's what can lead to this mesothelioma cancer. So this diagram here is kind of a reminder that these asbestos fibers, when they're breathed in, they can embed in the lungs, and that's where you can lead to these tumors. Now, a reminder that removal of asbestos-containing insulation materials should be done by professionals with proper training and equipment that protects them from inhaling the asbestos. So like if you move into a house one day that has asbestos, please don't go and try to remove it by yourself. This needs to be done like they need to tape everything off. They need to like suction out air. It's a whole process, and like professionals should be doing this so that you don't have any risk of it getting kicked up into the air. this is a picture of like the whole proper precautions that have to be done. So like not a do-it-yourself project. Professionals need to be dealing with asbestos so that y'all aren't getting mesothelioma. Another important one is dysentery, which might not be so common here in the United States, but globally it is going to be a concerning problem that we do have like happening a lot. So dysentery is a bacterial infection that is caused by food or water being contaminated with feces. This feces is often going to come from sewage being released into rivers and streams and used for drinking water. So it's going to typically be in areas where the water is not properly being taken care of and filtered and cleaned and all of that. But obviously it can still happen here in the United States. Like if we're getting, if you are like going into a river and you end up accidentally drinking the water, like you can get these bacterial infections. It's just going to be more predominant in developing countries. Now, what dysentery does is it causes intestinal swelling. It can result in blood in the feces. It causes severe dehydration due to diarrhea. So you're losing your fluids. And it kills 1.1 million people annually, mostly in developing countries with poor sanitation, limited access to water filtration. But it, like I said, it kills 1.1 million. So it is going to be like globally a serious one here. Now, it can be treated with antibiotics that kill the bacteria causing the infection. Also, you're going to need to have access to treated or filtered water that can help to rehydrate, which again, like access to healthcare and filtered water is not always going to be something that you're having in these developing countries, which is why we see it more predominantly in those countries. And it's the things that are going to treat it, you don't always have access to in those developing countries. So this is going to be your practice FRQ for 8.14, where you're going to practice the suggested skill of describing an aspect of a research method, design, and or measure used. So I want you to look at this map right here. Look at the legend, look at the different, like, make sure you pay attention to the flow of the river and where these things are located and all of that. So below, in this diagram here, is a map of a river that is used as the main drinking water source for a Chinese village. Chinese scientists suspect that the sewage treatment plant is releasing untreated sewage into the river. So there's two parts. This is a little bit of a longer FRQ, but it's giving you good skills. So for the first one, if scientists plan to measure fecal coliform bacterial counts at the 6 sampling sites below, so pay attention, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this picture here, make a claim about which site should serve as the control group in the experiment and justify your answer with evidence. Identify, or then B is going to be identify a disease that scientists could test for in the people of this village and explain how the prevalence of this disease would help the researchers to determine whether the sewage treatment plant is releasing untreated sewage into the river. So that's going to be a practice FRQ for 8.14, and those are your notes on 8.14.